6:30. We'll move on to Section 7, General. 7A is to hold a public hearing and consider approval of an ordinance terminating the tax increment finance reinvestment zone number 3, City of Burleson, Texas, dissolving the board of directors and tax increment fund for the zone. This is before you on first reading. Staff presenter tonight is Tommy Ludwig, Deputy City Manager. Tommy?
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Good evening, Mayor, members of City Council. So tonight, as the City Secretary has stated, I'll be presenting item number 7A, which is a briefing associated with Tax Increment Finance Reinvestment Zone, or TIRZ number 3. So if you recall, back on March 21st, myself and Tony McElwain, who's our development director, briefed you on the transit-oriented district plan development as well as the TIRZ that's associated with that. And specifically, the TIRZ was an economic development tool. It was situated geographically in conjunction with the TOD to facilitate the establishment of the W4 commuter rail line as well as the proposed commuter rail station in the city of Burleson. We discussed there are a number of challenges associated with that, principal among those being just funding and the logistics, low ridership. And so to date, the TIRZ has actually never established a board of directors, nor they've issued debt or identified projects to fund within the boundaries of the TIRZ. So when I spoke to you on the 21st, really laid out two options for the City Council. One is to consider dissolving the TIRZ, and with that said, that would require an ordinance, and that item is before you this evening, a first reading of that ordinance. Should you elect to dissolve the TIRZ, then the fund balance and the capacities associated with the district would roll back to the general fund. The other option before you would be to return or modify the boundaries of the TIRZ. Should you do that, first we'd need to move forward with the establishing of a board of directors, identify projects to potentially fund. And the other thing too is that if you are going to modify the boundaries, you need to determine what geographic area you'd want to incorporate, because generally economic development tools are to facilitate a specific area is likely no longer valid. Maybe the boundaries no longer make sense. So on the 21st, Council directed staff to move forward with bringing an ordinance forward for consideration to dissolve the TIRZ. Just to recap from a capacity standpoint, the current fund balance in the TIRZ number 3 is $135,000, but we do anticipate that fund balance to increase should it remain to approximately $1.7 million by fiscal year 26-27. From a debt issuance capacity, the TIRZ has approximately $4.8 million worth of capacity that could be issued over the next 5 years. And then again, should the council elect to dissolve the TIRZ, then all the capacity and fund balance would roll back to the general fund. It does bring up a policy question. So if the TIRZ is dissolved, the council does have a decision to make in terms of what to do with the excess capacity. Certainly you could fund additional capital projects from the general fund. You could fund additional operations, reduce the tax rate, or a combination of those three. The intention is, from a staff perspective, is that we would bring you options forward as we brief the general fund budget to give you some direction on what you could potentially do with that excess capacity. So with that said, again, the item before you this evening is simply a first reading of the ordinance to dissolve the TIRZ, and you have the option to either approve said ordinance or deny. And I'm happy to answer any questions you may have about the item.
Does this require a public hearing?
No, sir.
So we're ready for a vote?
Oh, wait, I'm sorry. Yes, it is a public hearing. Sorry. Yes. So if you'll call the public hearing.
I'll open this hearing up at 6:01.
And I have no speaker cards on 7A. Is there anybody in the audience that would like to speak on this item?
Are you ready to close?
We haven't had a board for this length of time. We're having a lot of discussions about the TOD area in the last couple of meetings and in upcoming meetings. I'm concerned about if it's prematurely dissolving the TIRZ. I understand the funds will roll into the general fund. I understand we can still use the funds for that area, even if it goes into the general fund. It's just not defined that it has to be used in those in that area. But my concern is that area is zoned our highest density in our entire community. And we're going to have to heavily look at what our options are, given that the infrastructure over there is not fully developed, and there's infinite possibilities that can go with the land, given the zoning that is already by right. So I just don't want to remove a tool from our toolbox prematurely if we don't have to. If we came back to this in a month or couple months and said, okay, we realize it's not necessarily, those funds aren't going to be needed to necessarily incentivize, but that's my fear, is we're going to need some tools to figure out how to reduce the zoning, encourage, influence those that are interested in developing that area. So I'm afraid I'm just wondering if this is premature. Do we have to do it right now? It's gone this long without a board. Does it hurt for a couple more months? I know it creates another item back on our agenda that we're revisiting this discussion a couple of times, but we've got to make some big decisions about the TOD area. And I don't want to limit ourselves. And I understand even with the general fund, it can still be used over there, but we don't know yet what we're going to do, how we're going to incentivize reducing down zoning, or incentivize not building to its highest density. So am I alone on this? I just have a reservation about moving too fast on it, and it not necessarily, I don't know what necessitates doing it right this minute.
It's certainly a policy decision. I'm happy to brief this as many times as the council wants me to come up and speak to it. There's nothing pressing. The TERS life is 25 years. I believe it's going to absolve itself in 2037. There's nothing pressing. To your point, Councilmember Johnson, I think, the TERS are generally created from a geographic standpoint to facilitate a specific area. Should you dissolve it, you don't lose the flexibility to continue to use that capacity to fund projects in that area, but you are limited, should the TERS remain, to only use that capacity within the boundaries of the TERS. So it's simply a policy decision, and if it's the will of the council, we can certainly hold or whatever the council would like to do.
Victoria, what kind of time frame do you think you'd need?
I think.
How long have we had this? How long have we had this tool?
I think it's been in existence since 2012. 2012.
How much time do you want?
Well, I know in the next couple of meetings, we're going to have some discussions about the TOD. And I understand there was a development that was being talked about. Maybe that's not going to happen. Maybe it is. And I realize I'm trying to tread carefully. But we have had a lot of discussions about the density of this area. And I think we're going to have to really look at it and figure out what's going to work for the citizens, what's going to work for us, where do we really want, what's the vision for the TOD area? And we don't have that yet. And so I'm fearful to just say, to start taking things away from it when we don't know what we're doing with it yet. I agree that I've listened to staff's listened to the reports in that we're most likely not going to have a W-4 line. That's going to cost in the trillions of dollars. But it is zoned at this moment our highest density. And so what are the possibilities with that area? And I just don't even think we've truly weighed those options. I'd like to hear an economic development presentation on what can go there. I just don't think we've explored any of that, and I'm afraid we're just taking a tool out of our toolbox too early. Until we actually know what we want the TOD to be, is it okay if it's not a TOD, what is it? What goes out there? And what, I don't want to remove tools that say, like, if someone's going to build something, how can we maybe utilize those funds to incentivize something that's more beneficial for the whole community?
So you feel more comfortable if the funds were earmarked? It's still available to us, even if we dissolve it, correct?
It is, and I understand that.
It is.
It can be available to us if we need it?
Yes, sir. So if you dissolve the TERS, the capacity in the fund balance will just roll to the general fund.
So once it's in the general fund, though, It could be used for something else before we determine what we need, that, oh, it would have been really nice to have this 1 point something million to extend this road or put in this water line or put in this sewer line to incentivize this type of project versus that type of project.
Well, I think, as Tommy said, I mean, it's a policy question for the council, and we consider this item really related to the budget process. So if you needed some more time and you wanted to say June, we bring it back and have a discussion, then we would have an understanding of where the budget is and some options for you of how we could approach the proposed budget for next year. If that's the will of the council, we could certainly do that. Or bring it back at another time. But I think to have some kind of budget impact on the coming year, you'd want to know by June what your desire is, so we could put that into the tax rate and the overall budget that'd be coming forward to you.
And I think also too, but I didn't mean to cut you off.
No,
Councilman.
if it gets absorbed into the general fund, then it's absorbed and we spend it, or it's allocated somewhere before we actually have a plan for the TOD area, and then we don't. Then we're kind of backpedaling and thinking, well, that would have been nice to use those funds that we had set aside for that.
Well, and what I was going to say is in June, we intend to bring back kind of a second briefing on the TOD, which we talk about. I know there were questions about overlay and options associated with that, among other options of potentially voluntary rezoning of those properties. And Tony is working on that briefing and beginning the initial stages of engaging the property owners. So the hope is by that time in June, we'd have at least some additional detail about maybe what the incentives may or may not be should the council want to proceed with an overlay.
And if we wait, we might have some ideas on specific areas this money will go, and not, I don't mind it going in the general fund, but also I think this money should have a specific purpose. We should have that in mind so that it doesn't just float out there and all of a sudden it's gone and, okay, we've gone over here, used it here and there. There is a purpose right now for it. I understand taking it out, but let's at least give some thought as to where it is specifically going before we just say, okay, it's out there. So I'm with Victoria. What will it hurt to wait till June when we can think about it and talk it over?
I hear what everybody's saying, and I wonder if there's not, and I think there is, but definitely we could dissolve the TIS on here. We could do the TERS and get rid of it, but at the same time set up a separate account earmark within the general fund, correct? That you could use for an emergency use elsewhere. It wouldn't be locked in like a TERS is legally locked in by law as far as what we can do and not do with that money. But I worry about getting us to a position to where we have money sitting there that we're not able to allocate or and we're not able to budget properly. I know we're getting ready to get into a budget cycle. I think it's important that the city staff be able to look at the money they have and know what that money is, where it can go, what they can do with it, and the best allocation of those resources. With the price of everything going up and everything, they may need this money for something else in the meantime. I'm not sure. But I definitely hear what both of you are saying.
I just don't think it's going to hurt to what, I'm sorry, Victoria.
I'm so sorry.
I just don't, June is not going to kill us.
No.
We're okay. We can wait till June where we can talk this over. If we want to dissolve it in June, that's Jim Dandy. I don't have a problem with it. But
Let's have a plan. Let's at least,
Yeah.
let's at least
And we
talk
can-
through our options, and
we can
then,
get one.
Yeah.
And we can get one.
So is the direction of council, bring it back in June and also try to identify some options for how the funds could be
Sure.
either spent
Yeah.
or other options, a combination of reducing the tax rate or other modifications?
yes, I'd like to move to table it. Oh, sorry, Ms. Haynes' light is on.
Okay, at this time, if we are going to, if it is the will of the council to table, I would ask that the mayor reopen the public hearing and then continue the public hearing. That way we don't have to renotice or do anything because we're publicly stating.
I'll reopen the hearing at 6:12.
And then you'll want to continue the public hearing to, let me ask first, if this council is going to move to June, are you doing the first meeting, second meeting in June, or?
I think from a staff perspective, ideally, we would need to the second meeting in June for Tony to finish his analysis on the options for the TOD, if that's okay with council.
Okay, so Mayor, if you could continue the public hearing till the second meeting in June, second regular council meeting in June. Pardon? Okay, right now, we've opened the public hearing, so all we're going to do right now is just continue this public hearing, and we're going to do dates, we're going to say specifically to the second regular meeting in June. Just continue the public hearing till then,
We're going to continue this till June.
till the second regular council meeting
Till
in
the
June.
second regular meeting in June. Thank you.
Okay, and now, council can make motion.
Move to table. Oh, sorry.
I have a motion by Victoria and a second by Ron. Oh, here we go. Ronnie, you got yours clicky going? There we go. I got a motion by Victoria and a second by Ronnie. Please vote. Passes 6-1.
Thank you, Mayor, Council.